some relief on tax rate, then we take you all the way to the top, and you'll see this little blue line that assumes two things. The very top line assumes two things. One is that you're going to continue having the tax levy of the blue line below, and then the enterprise funds helping the city pay off that debt. And that kind of shows you capacity going forward as to if you were to keep those transfers in from enterprise funds, if you were to keep the tax. You're at about 23 cents on property taxes for this particular side of the ledger. So what we're trying to do is, how can I get you a penny? Is by bringing you to the gold line there. You see the little gold dotted line. By bringing that down, we're able to provide you that penny relief. And basically, all I'm trying to do is get you 2019, and then 2020, and then 2021. Bring those payments down by about $1.5 million, $1.7 million, and get you there. Of course, how do you do that? Well, you do that by looking at your debt portfolio on the left side and find where is it the most economical way to get you there. And you'll see two rows at the bottom in blue, the 2010s and 2012s. There's about $47 million. What your debt service really is, in order to get this thing done. Well, that's about 5 months away from my call date in the case of the 2010 bonds, and another 2.5 years in the case of the 2012 bonds that has a 21 call date. At the end of the day, that's what we believe to be the most efficient way of trying to carve out this capacity. So then, what does this do? If we go to page 3, you'll see that you would take about 36.95 of that $480 million portfolio, so about 7% of your portfolio, to try to, what we call in our business, you pick and toss. You pick principal on the front end that is causing you to pay very accelerated and dump it a little bit to the back. But we're not extending debt. We're using the same structure of the old bonds. You're picking principal in the front and taking it to the back within the same structure. By doing that, I get you savings in the front end. You see that bar there in gold, and you got the green numbers that show you where the savings are going to come, but then it's going to come at an expense by putting it in the back, and that's in red. So the cost of this shy of $3 million doing that. But the IRS tells us, tell your client, how much is this really going to cost you in present value dollars. The dollar of 2030 is not the same value as the dollar of 2018-19, for that matter. So the total cost of the city is about $523 on a present value basis. So that's what we had to do in evaluating how you can get there. So we looked at every bond that is outstanding, looked at the call dates, and find out where can we get there. Now, when you look at the entire picture of the city, then we look at the entire portfolio, and I call this the ugly sheet because there's so many numbers. But at the end of the day, what should matter to you as you go home and evaluate this option is look at column E, and how column E is basically what is on page 3, and how that come as you go across from left to right, how it gets you to column M, and that the tax rate will be 23 cents for that matter, down to 22 cents. What's also important here is we're assuming that you may be calling a bond referendum this fall for streets of about $52 million. Well, this project or this approach is not going to affect any of that. In fact, we have a column in there on column I where the $52 million has already been assumed that you will borrow that money and take it from there. We've also assumed in column J, right after, you have a little savings account in that fund, and you're going to try to use that fund in the most effective manner. Right now, we're about $12 million and change at the very bottom of that column J. You're about $12 million and change, and we're using over the years, over the upcoming years, about another $6.6 million to bring that down. We don't think you're going to bring it down. It normally is a very conservative fund. You've been building it up pretty nicely. This year, as you can see in 18, you're drawing about $3.2 million. We haven't gotten year to date. You're still in the course of the fiscal year concluding, but at the end of the day, that's what's out there. Before I get into questions of the numbers and stuff, then on the last page, I don't know if your package shows page 4. It was meant to be page 5. We will come back to you if you so choose to go this route and present the plan on or about August the 14th, not August the 7th. Basically, we'll call this a restructuring, and then we sell the bonds 2 weeks later on the 28th. We've already talked to one of the rating agencies, Standard & Poor's, who gives you a AA credit. They have absolutely no problem with this. And then we'll close on or about the 19th, hopefully the day after you set the tax rate on the 18th. This, again, is all preliminary, and that's what this is. So I'll stop and entertain questions you may have.
Any questions, Ms. Opal?
Mr. Hinojosa, thank you for that presentation. It takes me back to my days in some capital budgeting and financing in college, and I don't want to go back there for long. So let's see. So in looking at this, if we were not a general government and we were in the business sector, would this be the kind of transaction that a business would look at, that they would say, you know, the net present value of being able to make this shift is a de minimis cost. It enables us to do some things currently that otherwise we wouldn't be able to do. I mean, this isn't out of the norm for being able to maximize your resources for the benefit of, quote, your customers, who in this case would be the citizens of Corpus Christi.
Well, I think the fundamental of credit is vested in 2 factors: your ability and your willingness to pay. It's very simple. Are you able to pay your debt? Yes. The part is the willingness. Then you have 2 other factors. You got your operating budget, and then you got this debt portfolio. The debt portfolio is paid right now in a reasonable, fast way. It's just a function of just looking at page 2, how your payments are coming down like a little water slide. But right now you are in 18, and 19, 20, and 21 is a lot of pressure. So all you're trying to do is carve what you believe to be the most efficient way to be able to do what you're willing to do, and that is operate your budget within a tax rate that you've been having to use for the last, I guess, 3 to 5 years or so. So I'm not going to suggest to you, I don't want to come across as selling you this. I'm just trying to come across to you. It's not unusual to when you want to work within your means, and one of the issues causing you a little heartburn, move it over and stay within the same means.
And it looks to me, in looking at this, the strategy is that we just need to be aware that in these out years, there's going to be additional revenue needed to pay that, but according to your water slide analogy, there should be capacity within there to pick that up and be able to do that, where it's not as much of a duress on the system to be able to make those payments.
On the tax rate system, yeah.
Okay, very good, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Mr. Smith?
Thank you, Mr. Hinojosa. If we go back to slide 2, you said the blue bars, so we've got a call date on general improvement bonds 2012 of 2021. Mm-hmm. Are you planning on some defeasance or?
Yes, the way we do this is that we borrow money, the $39 million today. Mm-hmm. A portion of those bond proceeds in 2018. Oh, I'm sorry, thank you. A portion of those 2018 bonds will go into buying treasuries and be set up in an escrow.
Okay. So it's defeasance.
Yeah, it's a defeasance. But
Okay.
in order to defease it, I got to buy treasuries.
Right.
And so we do that, and then that escrow takes care of the 21 call date.
So that's how you're able to do the bonds that we can't pay off in 21, that you're putting them in an account, so they'll be
Yeah.
there to do it.
Yeah, we don't have enough cash sitting us around
Okay.
to do that. I have to do the borrowing. Yeah.
And this is a question for Mr. Selman, that what we're not seeing here, I think, is the change in our rates. And I forgot, but several years ago, we were paying 18 cents in interest and principal of our tax rate. Now we're up to 22 cents, to almost 23 cents. And I think what you're suggesting here would be kind of stopping that and actually putting it back. And I think that fact, a lot of strains we're seeing, and whether it's in our parks or our public safety, is because we've been paying more and more and more in debt service. And correct me if I'm wrong, one thing we'd be doing here, since we're pushing things backwards, we are reducing our ability or our capacity to borrow without changing the rates in future years by doing this. That since we're shifting on the backside, if we want to maintain a current rate, we've lost some capacity to borrow in our out years, so to speak.
Sort of. And
Okay.
to paraphrase the whole discussion, essentially taking the area that you see here above the orange line, the area that's in gray above that line, and bringing it down to this area.
Yeah.
That's what we're doing. But you've still got the other space that's built above that.
And if I may add to that, Mr. Smith, the last 10 years, 10 years ago, your tax rate was at 56 cents.
Mm-hmm.
And it was broken up into two. The operating budget rate, about 36.5 cents, and then 20 cents for debt service.
Yeah.
Today, that 56-cent tax rate is now at 60 cents.
Mm-hmm.
And it's broken up by 37 cents and 23 cents.
Okay.
So you're bringing the 23 down to 22
Mm-hmm.
from a 19 or 20 cents that you were
Yeah.
back 10 years ago.
Okay.
So you're within the same, that parameter, but coming the other way.
Yeah, coming the other way, where we've shifted, so I was said 18, but the actual number is 20.
Yeah, it's 19.9, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, so we're just changing a trend that we've had that's put stress on us.
That's right,
Okay, thank you.
yeah.
Anyone else? One thing you mentioned, that the bond issue that we anticipating and working on this year of $52 million.
Mm-hmm.
That can be absorbed in the rate you're.
That is correct, sir.
But if we go forward with that bond issue, the totality of the bond issue, subject to change by the council, currently is, if I remember, the total package is 92 million. Huh?
96 million, I think.
96. So anything, just for the public information, anything above the 52 million would require a tax increase to support anything above the 52.
That's right, if it were to be paid by property taxes. We may be using other funds to offset that difference. We don't know that yet, but we will have that. We don't know that, meaning me, Estrada Hinojosa, not your staff.
Maybe we'll win the lottery, I don't know, but it's going to be paid by people whose billfold.
I understand, but I can't tell you definitively how it's going to be
Right,
done,
okay.
yeah, at this moment.
All right. So just for the public's sake, that you've got capacity without impacting your tax rate of $52 million,
That is correct,
even with this adjustment.
yeah,
And anything above that would take a tax increase.
yes.
Okay. Anything else, Mr. Hunter?
Thank you, Mayor. For your net NAV growth and net assessed value growth,
Yes, on page 4?
how are we determining that, and how much could that swing by?
Very good question, Mr. Hunter. I think you probably know, for the last 10 years, you've been in excess of 4% growth. and we are using 1.5% growth for the next 3 years, then 1% twice, and then 0.5% for the balance. You should exceed that growth. But, you know, I guess, well, what do we say in this business? Historical results are not, I guess, a guarantee of future. So for that matter, I can't tell you what the future holds, but we're being conservative as we can. And as we go about bringing to you a plan of finance, and we know what the property values are going to be, we're going to, you know, make those changes in those columns. But for planning purposes, that's what we're doing now.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
So if we were to see, let's say, a 4% growth, how would
tax-
that affect us?
You
And
could.
if we had no growth?
Goes back to what the mayor said. You know, today we have capacity to borrow 52. Well, if you have 96 million in needs, then the question becomes, well, how much can you afford? Can you do 52? Maybe we can do 56 if property values are greater. The other way is just borrow 52, bring the tax rate down from 22 to maybe a little less. Yeah.
Ms. Opal?
Real quickly, Mayor. So Mr. Sullivan, I'm assuming this, you know, Mr. Hinojosa, he's relatively new. He's a new kid on the block. So I'm assuming this is all a collaborative process. This is so complex. I mean, I just come back to this and, you know, even though we've had a good presentation, I'm not sure that I could explain this. So when we see Mr. Hinojosa come in to work with the community, because I think he and I talked last night for the first time. I know he's talked to some other council members and there's been a more robust relationship. But I mean, is this a collaborative process among the staff and the history and all these things? I mean, how do we get to this really complex stuff? I find that so interesting.
Yeah, I would like to think it was a premeditated series of activities. But being relatively new, I can't testify to that. But I assume it was. The city council, in a premeditated way, they had capital needs out there. And they took the action they felt they needed to take in order to take care of those capital needs, and that meant going into debt to do it. And they under their tax rate, they moved their tax rate around to ensure that they were able to meet those capital needs and those bond payments. Again, I go back to, if I could go back to slide number 2 again, just click the reverse arrow back. There we go.
That's not very complicated.
And I'm with you, council member. Quite often I grapple with the complexities and look for ways to provide for the simplicity. And what this proposal will do is it will get us down to the yellow line in this bar graph. So we're taking the gray above that yellow line and we're moving it below the yellow line over in future years.
And so basically the capacity that we're creating is that we relieve ourselves of a little intensity in 2019, a little more intensity in 2020, and on down through the years. But I think the reference was it's going to limit our capacity to be able to add additional debt.
It goes back to what Mr. Hunter was saying. Property values go up, tax remains the same.
Oh, I love your optimism.
And the other side of that, follow the trend of this orange line, the yellow line. The yellow line is going down.
Yeah. Oh no,
So
I love the
you've
water
got the
slide
space
imagery.
above that. You've got the space above that yellow line. If you were to draw a line straight across where it taps out at 18,
well, I have been.
That would give a different look.
I have experienced this in years past when, under a different city administration, there was an attempt to really create this width and opportunity. And I know this is a collaborative effort among all of our staff to be able to understand how this works, and that it provides this council with the tools that it needs to be able to surface what our citizens expect from us. Because at the end of the day, they're our customers, and I think they look to us as their sort of board of directors to make sure that what we're doing here is reflective of a really rich process that involves all our team to be able to get to the right answer on this side and on the other. So, thanks.
Mayor, we believe this to be a sound process mechanism for and a good financial move.
And your phrase that the council decided this is a collective council action over years that's impacted this rate, decisions made in terms of taking on the debts and this sort of thing. Okay, any other questions? I'm just glad we got somebody. Mr. Garza?
Well, I think that right now at this particular point in time, one of the choices we have is to cut services, and that's not appetizing to any of us. And so we're in a tough situation right now where some of the funds and some of the things that we do are set up for a rainy day. and with the storm and with the reduced values, or the fact that the values didn't increase despite all the additional tax-based investments by some of the builders and some of the groups in town, the commercial, the people in the commercial sector, we haven't achieved the tax base increase that we would expected because of some of the, because of the storm. So this is a rainy, I see this as a rainy day, and this is a good time to actually exercise an option like this. I also think your numbers in terms of growth are very, very conservative. I think with all the investments that we're seeing on the North Shore, I think that we have opportunities to do that. Now, in terms of getting into debt, in 2010 or so thereabouts, the city councils, because of the public outcry related to the condition of our infrastructure and streets, said we're going to go ahead and bite the bullet, and we're going to start investing in street bond programs to improve the collectors and arterials to the tune of $55 million every or so of thereabouts every 2 years, or 110 every 4, whatever it is. So we're probably down the road, if I count the numbers right, we're probably close to about $500 million, you know, close to, in terms of investments in bond programs. So some of the improvements that we're seeing citywide, all the road construction, is due, it was a decision made to basically go into debt and try to take advantage of the fact that at that time we felt that the construction pricing was low, the interest rates were low for us to be able to get that debt. So I think there's certain things that we were looking at taking advantage of in that particular scenario. Now, it has put us in this particular predicament, but I think that looking out and looking at some of the increased income potential that we have as a city, I think this is a prudent move to make if we don't want to reduce services. Thank you.
And again, trying to get back to, on your page 3, the bottom line over a 20, well, we're talking 19 to 30, so that 11 years?
12.
12 years?
Yeah.
All right. On your page 3 there, if I'm reading this correctly, and certainly, hopefully, make me, whatever I say, make it right, whether I make it right or not. The bottom line is, by restructuring this, the cost differential in the 12 years is going to cost us $523.
Thereabouts, yeah.
And it gives us a lot more wiggle room for that $523.
Yeah, I think the thing that you really are doing is preserving an operating budget that doesn't tap into your fund balance. So when you're concerned about your exposure to risk, you know, to acts of God, hurricane, storm, something, and hitting you, we talked earlier today about how's this budget 19 projected to do, what is it projected to do with your fund balance, your savings account, and you're not touching that. This is just an inconvenience to have to do in order to get to that line. How do you preserve your savings account?
Okay.
And that's what we're doing, yeah.
But if we do nothing versus what you're suggesting is, I mean, it's going to cost, we're going to pay the same amount of money either way, only to buy this wiggle room.
Yeah.
In anticipation of rates going up, I mean, property values going up and expanding the tax base, we're paying an additional $523.
On a present value basis, yes, sir.
That's a pretty good investment to me.
It's more complicated than it sounds.
I just didn't want to make sure I understood it before I went out and said it and then get hammered. So, okay.
Now, rates can move up or whatever between now and then. You know, the escrow we're going to set up is also going to get us more interest earnings. So maybe a wash, but you know, we're still away from doing this loan anyway. So.
All right. Any other questions? All right, there's no action required. We appreciate it very much.
Yes, sir.
And I think each time Mr. Hinojosa, so far, every time he's come forward, I think it shows we made the right decision getting the financial advisor. Now, if he comes back with a bad report, we may have to reevaluate that. But we appreciate the information you give us and trying to help us understand it. Thank you very much.
Many of us, Mayor, are under constant evaluation. Let me.
Here, here.
Mayor, the next series of slides I want to take you through is that discussion that we have had on the Type B money, and how could we channel that Type B money in a methodology that will allow us to do more improvements on the residential street side. And this we believe, and the council members can correct me if I'm wrong, in the formation of the B, a lot of that discussion with the formation of the B was trying to find a way to do more residential streets, to do more streets. Well, the Type B was specifically set up to where you've got half of the money coming in for Type B goes to economic development, 500,000 goes to affordable housing, and the remainder goes to arterials and collectors. Residential streets are not called out. Specifically, arterials and collectors are called out. And Mayor, let me address the question that you asked at the last meeting. No. Well, his question was, can we pay existing debt and existing projects, particularly the existing projects part, with the Type B money? And the answer is no, it would need to be new projects. So this particular scenario is contingent upon the election whereby arterials and collectors are approved. So that is correct. This scenario is contingent upon that. We would have to find another way to use these resources, and we would use them on arterials collectors. These resources have to be used that way, but we would look to find another mechanism to doing it as opposed to paying the new debt.
Could I ask just for some clarification? You made the statement that it would be dependent upon the election. You're talking about
needs to be
the
new
2018 bond election?
Yes, that's correct.
And I'm not a lawyer, so help me here, and I'm just thinking out loud, and that could get me in trouble. The approval to spend money on arterial and collector streets with Type B money, in my opinion, was approved on the election.
Correct.
So that money's already been approved to spend. The decision is which streets do we spend it on? And wouldn't that be more of a staff function and based on the street grid and determining which street needs to be done and which one in the order and because of their condition? Why is it dependent upon the 2018 bond election to be approved? Because the money's already been approved.
Right.
So if we just had a staff recommendation to come back and say these are the 4 or 5 or 3 or 10 arterial streets and we've got $3 million in Type B, or I don't know how much this is going to, over time it will accumulate if we don't spend it on an annual basis, but I think the idea you cash it out so you don't go in debt is you do as many streets as the money will allow you to do.
Right. And
you just you get a list based on staff recommendation, just work your way through that list. So why do you need voter approval?
Not necessarily. We need voter, this scenario that is created here is contingent upon voter approval of those projects. Going back to how that project listing was created, though, as you recall, through that process of the creation and designation of those projects, quite a few presentations here to City Council outlining those projects that are identified in the 52 specifically, all arterials and collectors. And the methodology by which staff brought those to City Council to talk about was, in fact, this pavement assessment, conditions of roadways, and it was a staff-generated list from which the City Council had input. Okay, so that process of the creation of that list, and you still have input on that. That doesn't happen until we get to the point of declaring and putting together the election and deciding to go out.
Okay,
and how that goes. But let me finish the scenario. In the event that that would not happen, then we would look to utilize these resources in another mechanism. In other words, we would either do a spend-as-you-go or some other fiduciary process to ensure that those monies go to arterials and collectors. Again, those arterials collectors selected through a payment assessment process. If the A fails, then we would likely pick projects out of there as being top priority and look to use these resources for those.
So are you proposing, and the only way I can tie it to the election, because the election in 2018 bond proposal is the authorization to sell in Proposition 1, $52 million for street repairs and whatever, and the majority of those streets, well, all of them are collectors or arterials, none of them are residential.
Right.
So you're using the type B money. This scenario is you're going to use this. Let's just use $3 million. I see $3 million.
Yep, that's the number, Mayor.
That's the round number that type B is going to produce on an annual basis, right? Or anticipated?
At our current rate, yes.
Okay.
That's the number we anticipate.
So the only way I can interpret having to get approval on Proposition 1, the $52 million for arterial and collector streets, is that you're going to sell the $52 million and use this $3 million as the payment on the debt of those bonds.
To help pay that debt, that's correct.
So it's not going to be an accumulation of cash over time.
Correct. That's step one. What you've just mentioned is step one.
But, all right, now how then, and this is, well, I want to talk some more because in my opinion, we haven't addressed residential, but let's see what Mr. Garza's got to say and we'll go do some other stuff.
Okay, I'm probably going to oversimplify it, but it was my understanding when we were pushing for type B, right, in order to try to squeeze something for residential street reconstruction, right, that we would take and say, if we would generate $3 million a year, right, that money from the type B would be used for arterials and collectors, right? So where if you have a projected bond offering of $52 million, and over 2 years you did $6 million in collector and arterial work, instead of offering $52 million for collectors and arterials, which is the program that we have set forth for taking care of our collectors and arterials, we would offer $46 million in collectors and arterials, and we would offer $6 million in residential streets offerings. So we'd start street reconstruction that would be part of the.
So you're still, let me see if I understand what you just
The only difficulty
said.
with that is that if you have to specify what residential streets you're going to address in that offering, and I don't know if you can be general or you have to be specific, but then you might not get passage of that deal. Now, so the way that you're talking about doing it in terms of floating some of those funds from type B to not have to do debt for the bond program, instead of floating $52 million in bond debt, you would do 46, and then the savings there would be able to be a steady stream into residential road reconstruction. Is that what I'm getting? It's just a different way of doing it.
It's a different way of getting there, but rather than reducing that $52 million, you're still talking about relieving the debt service on using the B money, and then freeing up, because you specifically can't directly use the type B for residential streets.
Right.
But you can use it on arterials and collectors.
So again,
So anything that we would spend on, going back to your scenario, anything that was going to be spent on arterials and collectors from some other fund, wherever that fund may be, would now be spent on arterials from the type B.
type B for that portion.
And then freeing up money somewhere else for
Residential
streets, which is exactly what we're proposing here.
Well, I mean, it's real close. I just think that the way that you're presenting it offers us more flexibility and possibly more acceptance from the public than having to be specific about what residential streets you're going to address in a bond program, and maybe, you know, running the risk of not getting the bonds approved because they don't affect one particular subdivision or one particular street.
Well, that might pit one subdivision against the other as well.
That's
and
concern.
that could be the other side of that coin would be the potential problems that could be created in an election. Why their street, not my street?
Right.
These are the things that y'all see every day in the maintenance of our roadways. We have separate funds doing maintenance, seal coats and overlays, and you will have someone that has a street in much worse condition than one that just got overlaid or just got seal coated. So they'll ask you, you're getting these questions, and I know that. They'll say, why did you fix that street when my street's in worse condition than that one? And the answer is their street needed a reconstruction, whereas the street that we're doing maintenance to ensure the life of that, if we try to apply that same methodology on fixing their street, just a seal coat, they're going to be right back where they are in no time at all, because the roadway needs reconstructing. And so we're looking at separate pools of money, one for maintenance and seal coats and overlays and that type of thing, and then one for reconstruction of residential streets. And what we're talking about here is providing a resource for reconstruction of residential streets.
Ms. Opal?
As I look around this room, I see a few faces who remember that the city of Corpus Christi used to have a robust street maintenance program, and every 7 years, your street got touched somehow. And over the years, that money, because of fiscal challenges to budgets, serious in some years, that just went away. And so we are now very constrained in the amount of resources that we are able to put into that street maintenance program. So I'm going to get to the punchline here. I told you don't bury the lead last week, so I'm not going to bury the lead. So under this scenario, what it offers is a pool of $3 million for residential streets?
Correct. Annually.
Annually. Not to be spent annually. I think there's how we would do that would come into play similar to that we do our bond programs. So that is the goal. The goal is to be able to do that. The concern that I just heard is that politically, if we put residential streets on the bond, then the people whose residential streets, because we have to be somewhat more specific in a bond about how they're, what the list is, and we've seen that happen with parks. When you put this general list, you run out of money or something happens or it doesn't get done quickly enough. So what you're suggesting is that by this process, the $3 million annually that would be generated by a reduction in the debt that we would have to pay,
correct,
is going to require the fortitude of this council and future councils to put that on streets, number one. So if something else
correct.
happens, that's the one risk I see in the scenario, is that it is, and this is general fund money. That's where streets live, is in the general fund.
Right.
So if there's some other constraint that looms larger than streets again, then councils in the future may not be willing to put that money into residential streets. So that is the one flaw that I see, is that it's predicated, as opposed to a bond that you sell that is dedicated for a purpose, i.e. residential street, where we have a contract to do that. We won't have said contract for this money, other than to pay that $3 million to pay the debt. Because once we commit to that, that funding stream goes there forever until the bonds are paid, correct? That would be like how we would pay it, pretty much?
It goes to what your financial advisor, the ability and the will.
Is he our financial advisor or your financial advisor?
Well, our financial advisor.
I didn't know we had one. I thought he worked for you. So, so that's that's kind of the challenge that I see, is we open that door so that over time, other fiscal challenges that hit that general fund budget might override this council's intent to intensify residential streets reconstruction. Because maintenance, we kind of got a little bit of a plan for maintenance. I've seen some headways, but it's this reconstruction where we go in and we just have to spend so much money to make that happen. So that's the one challenge, that how would we overcome that? Because we can't really require future councils to take that kind of action unless I'm mistaken. So something to really consider.
Mr. Smith?
Thank you. And I agree with Councilwoman Lindsay Opal that however we do this, we need to make sure that if we're going to go to residential streets, that it does go to residential streets and doesn't get siphoned off. But I think what I'm hearing that in this current budget year, we spent, what, $3.4 million on residential streets, and we're talking about $26 million. If we do a $52 million two-year bond package, it'd be $26 million on arterial and collectors as we sit right now with no changes. And all we're trying to do is get a shift where we're that $1.6 billion we need to take care of those 400 miles of residential. We're getting a little closer in that. And I think our arterials and collectors, even though we got a lot of bad ones, Laguna Shores Drive being one of them, but we are making good progress. So I support doing a bit of shift, putting a little bit of money, more money in residential, but making sure that we're lockboxed on this money. That's, yeah. Mm-hmm. So, okay, thanks.
That's going to be the key. Because if you don't lock it in, the 2 cents that we're proposing in this upcoming budget for residential streets, that's locked in. That's voter approved, it's locked in that account.
Yes, sir.
The problem you have with this scenario is that this, whatever amount money it is for residential streets, is subject to annual appropriations.
Yes, sir, it is.
And the first time a wheel squeaks over here that this park needs more money than the street, well, we'll just take a little money out of the street fund. Well, this over here needs a little more money. Well, we'll just take a little out of the street fund. We can put the repair and maintenance a little longer. That's why we're in the situation we're in today. So we're making good progress on our collectors and arterials. Since 2004, we've had over 100 projects on those kind of streets, and we're down to 25 or 30 now, and hopefully by the end of next year we'll be down to 3 or 4. So we've got a lot of wiggle room in that $52 million. And I think that's why my thought was, and it may not be, I'm just trying to find some additional monies, because that 2 cents is going to generate about $4 million, $3 million, 3.5? 3.5?
About 3, 4.
All right. Now, coming back to another important question. In this year's budget, since we don't necessarily get to see every line item budget, if you recall in last year's budget, at the end of the budget, we had not put anything additional in for residential streets, and I came back with my suggestion how we could find that equivalent of a 2 cents, and Ms. Rose came back with an alternate suggestion. And my concern was the bottom line of getting that money into the residential street fund. And so has that money been maintained in the residential street fund in this proposed budget yet?
Yes.
It's in there?
Yes, sir.
So the 2 cents would be in addition to that?
Correct.
All right. Well, that's good.
No, wait. What, in addition, let me
You're not swapping them out, are you? Yeah. Surely you're not.
We're not swapping it out, but the 3.4 will have been spent, so it's not accumulating necessarily.
But it's not been allocated.
I believe it has. Engineer, Val can answer it.
So we were told that would be put in so basically what you're saying is that you've got $3.4 million in general fund money you didn't have last year. So you've got an effective 2 cent rate increase based on the proposed budget, and we're still $3 million short?
Our existing budget has the 3.4 for the streets, and I'm going to have Val address that.
And is that out of the existing general fund, or is that counting the 2 cent new levy?
It's not counting the 2 cents. This year you had approved it. We are going to be coming back to council pretty soon, hopefully this coming month, Mayor, in July. We have a small out, and if you remember, we brought you a presentation of the streets we were going to do for the 3.4 million, and it was in the remaining districts that didn't have Ralston and Rogerson. So we did come back and we showed you which streets we were going to do, and we're right now negotiating the contract to get the designs completed on those projects. So you're going to see that contract come to you in July. But that is already, that's not a part of this accumulation. That one's being spent out of that fund. Does that answer your question?
But the project you've got coming in July is being paid out of this year's budget.
The 3.4 million, yes, sir.
All right, that's this year's budget.
Yes,
Have
sir.
you put 3.4 million in next year's budget out of the existing funding?
No. No, that tax was not approved.
That wasn't the agreement we had back in the day, that we were shooting that $3.4 million in the residential streets.
Which we're doing with the 2 cent in 2019.
And then you're offsetting it this year. So technically what you're doing, and this is what I'm getting at, technically what you're doing is, in effect, you have just handed the budget planning for 18-19 a 2 cent increase in the tax for $3.4 million that you didn't have last year because you took it out to put it in to the streets. So that you're replacing it in the upcoming budget with the 2 cent tax increase, freeing up the 3.4 that you gave up last year. So that means that money is available.
What we're doing, Mayor, is creating a revenue stream for the 3.4 with that 2 cent increase, which
right.
we did not create last year.
But the stream produced the 3.4. We just moved it from one department to another. It's still producing that 3.4. You've just spent it somewhere else.
No, there wasn't a revenue stream for that.
Your ad valorem tax is a revenue stream. Come up here. I don't know who you are. Introduce yourself.
The 3.4 million was a one-time deal that because we could not do the 2 cent tax increase because of the timing. The 3.4 came from $1 million came from fleet replacement, so we don't recommend continuing not to put money in a fleet replacement fund. 500,000 came from economic development because we knew Slitter Bond wasn't going to produce that kind of revenue to have to pay economic development. Another 500 came from public safety drag up that we knew we weren't going to occur. It wasn't going to occur because we didn't anticipate many retirements this year. And that's $2 million. I can't exactly remember what the other. It was. Yeah, there was 500,000 that came from a CIP, 500,000 that got to the 2.4, so that we generated that money on a lot of things that we wouldn't recommend continuing to do.
Okay, keep going.
That concludes my presentation.
Well, I think what you're hearing from the council is we're committed to ensuring that residential streets are addressed.
Yes, sir.
And this, while I like the creativity of it, it doesn't get us to the dedication of these funds. It puts it subject to annual appropriations. And while most of us will be here next year, hopefully all of us will be here in some fashion, except Ms. Rubio. She's singing adios come the end of the term, and congratulations to her for it. But the tendency is that if you have loose money going around there, it's going to be pulled from others. And I think we need to establish, and I think the reason the public is willing to vote to assess themselves up to 6 cents, and I think that would be willing to support this bond issue, they want their residential streets fixed. I can't go anywhere, HEB, Whataburger, you know, anywhere people don't come up. When are you going to fix my street? And I tell the people who live on my street, it's going to be the last one on the list because I'd be hammered if you came out and fixed my street now, unless they skip the patch in front of my house. But
Mayor, what we don't recommend is issuing another $30 million for residential streets and paying it in an indirect way on that. We don't recommend that, and we're not that comfortable either in consulting with our consultant, financial consultant. We're keen on looking for ways that we don't encumber more debt. You saw that bar chart.
Well,
you saw where that needle's moving on that bar chart. If we add to the debt, those bars all go up. And what this does, I know one proposal out there was to look at issuing debt every year to take care of residential street. And so 11 million one year and another 11 million. And that might be dependent upon a different revenue stream. It would still be something we would need to look at on our INS, though. We would have to have some level of commitment over there. But what this does, it provides essentially that same amount of resource on an every other year basis, giving a year for planning, queuing, engineering, and then a year for awarding of projects. We believe this is a sound mechanism for ensuring residential streets. If it's flat, we're looking at as much as $130 million over the next 20 years, which is just chewing into it a bit, but chewing into it a bit nonetheless. If it increases, that needle moves even more, and you can see, assuming 2 plus 2, the following year's tax increases, you can see how the needle suddenly moves on those numbers with the 2 plus 2 plus 2. If it's just a 1 year, then we're looking at somewhere in this area. So we feel this is a sound mechanism to meeting the needs while not incurring additional debt. The only way you can really ensure that a future council might do something inappropriate, and I find it hard to believe that the next mayor or the next city councilman, whomever it may be, won't get the same questions you're getting in HEB. When's my road going to be fixed? We know that we've got an issue in our community, and we feel this is a mechanism of getting there. And I would be shocked to discover that a future council, certainly in the near future, would be disinclined to do whatever they can do to fix these residential streets.
Mr. Garza?
Mr. Selman, is there anything we can do from a policy standpoint or council standpoint in terms of either passing a resolution that says that we dedicate those dollars that are coming to residential street reconstruction so that they're not basically washed into the general fund and used for something else, kind of like we've talked about this 2-cent increase, or the bond program dollars, or other things that the street maintenance fee that we're charging is dedicated to street maintenance.
That is a very good question, Mayor, and I guess it comes into to the degree to which a council can
commit future councils.
That's the key to that question. We can look into whether or not a resolution or something certainly could be adopted. Whether or not it would be enforceable, I'm not sure. I would leave that to our legal counsel to try to answer.
The selling point to a lot of people, at least on my side, to switching from a Type A to Type B was the fact that it was going to give us some road relief. It was going to be able to allow us flexibility to be able to hopefully do some residential street reconstruction. Mm-hmm. And that's the premise on which the
being
public
presented
passed.
To you.
Yes.
And that's the
so if there's a way that we can
presented.
cuff those funds, that's something that I would feel real comfortable, real good about. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Smith?
Well, and following up on Councilman Garza's, is it possible that we've got the election coming up in November, that the Type B could be altered, that we could use Type B funding for residential streets? State law doesn't allow us?
Yeah, the Type B, no.
Okay.
You're
So
not going to
that's-
be able to.
Okay.
I mean, that's why it was
That's
created
a quick
in the first
no,
place.
Counselor, so I'll accept that. I've never heard as quick a comment out of him in my life, so thank you.
I think we're going to mark the date and time for that, Mayor.
All right. Well, the reason I think it's important, and I don't remember the bond. Oh, Mr. Hunter, excuse me, I'm sorry.
The Type Bs, on our webpage, it says 50% is the only thing that I'll just read it. 50% of economic development, specifically the promotion and development of new and expanded businesses, enterprises to full extent allowed by Texas law. The rest of it doesn't mention any Texas law there. So, back to Councilman Smith's question, why isn't it possible?
To use Type B funds on residential streets, because you got a limited list of projects that you got a limited right to use projects for areas that are not business related or are not project type related. You have that hunting license just doesn't include residential streets.
Sure. And actually, that is a very good answer, and that's another question I'd like to bring up. Let's say Nile, Carroll Lane. streets in this town that are majority filled up with houses rather than businesses. But they are considered a collector, but really it's a residential street. What about streets like that? Can we incorporate it there?
It is that business relationship that keep in mind, it's an economic development sales tax.
Yes, but on Nile and Carroll, there are businesses, and there's a significant amount of them.
We'll
Carroll may not be the best one, but I mean, Nile's a pretty good.
So you have it is, you have some streets that may have some of those type businesses on them, a few residential streets that might be considered residential that could be eligible. Because they have the type of business generator that would allow that use.
Sure.
But there's not many.
Channeling the traffic to the commercial centers.
Sounds good. I'm just making sure that we're looking at that. I'm sure that y'all have looked at everything. And then I got a question. For the voter-approved 6 cents sales tax, when is the last year that we can approve the final 2 cents? If we were to, let's say we've already approved 4 cents, when would be the last time we could approve?
No, we've only approved, adopting this budget will be the first 2 cents.
Yeah, you haven't approved any cents yet.
Let's say next year we go ahead and approve the next 2 cents. When would be the final year, or is it indefinite that we could approve the final?
It depends how quickly you ramp up. Are you, if you're doing 2 cents a year, you do 2, 2, 2, and 2. You might do 2, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. You know, it's
collectively.
You have some flexibility. It's a maximum of 2.
Collectively, when would be basically what's our timeline to max it out? That's what I'm asking.
Asking the last year that they could impose the.
Okay.
Let me look at that Let me look at that section again before I give you.
I mean,
I'd like to pull it up and have it in front of me.
2030 to?
No.
The question is it going to sunset? Is the opportunity to increase the tax going to sunset? That's the question. We'll have Miles double check that and we'll get that back to you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right, so. That's good. All right, let me ask you this question. This be another question, I guess, for Miles to answer. The 2 cent levy on the tax rate, this is totally opposite of the goal not to go into debt. And I hate debt, but I hate bad streets too. To maximize the 2 cents, 2 cents generates $3 million, round numbers, 3.5 million.
3.4.
Ministerially speaking, 4 cents.
At today's valuation.
All right, 3.5 cents. How much debt will 3.5 cents service?
I'm looking over my shoulder.
No,
I usually use a quick 1% and get you about 34, 35. That's the number. That's my rule of thumb in doing that, but it's hard to say.
3 cents would support how much debt? Or, I mean, 3 million, not 3 cents, 3 million.
So a penny is $1.7 million, right? And then 3 pennies, that's what you're thinking?
No, for this.
2 cents, okay, 3 million.
If we levy 2 cents, that gets us $3.4 million.
Yeah, so you should be at about 55 million to 65 million, depending on interest rates.
Now, my next question, and this is a legal question. Can the ad valorem taxes levied, I guess they do, that's how you pay all your debt, whether it's CO, GO, or whatever other than revenue bonds. If it's a CO, your ad valorem tax can pay that, right?
Yes.
So one way to ensure that it goes to streets as opposed to anything else is that if you take your 2 cent tax rate levy and pledge that revenue to COs and not GOs, that 2 cents, instead of getting a $3 million street repair this year, could get a what'd you say it would service the debt?
55.
$55 million of residential streets for 2 cents. Is that right?
Yep.
And that 2 cents is committed to the streets because that's what the voters approved. And you can issue a CO without a bond election. You do it all the time. I mean, we're thinking out loud. I mean, I'm not going to let go of residential streets if you haven't figured that out.
Well, we're not going to let it go either, Mayor, so we're going to get it
Well, we're
figured
trying to
out.
figure a way to skin the cat.
Yes, sir, we are.
Excuse me, I shouldn't have said that, but take the stink out of the skunk, I guess, excuse me. But,
let me point out, let me read this provision again, just because I've keep. A dedicated fund to be used solely for residential street construction is established, and the City Council is authorized each year to levy, assess, and collect property tax not to exceed 6 cents per $100 of assessed value for the purpose of residential street construction to be deposited in the fund. Said taxes shall be used solely for the purpose of residential street reconstruction, including associated architectural, engineering, and utility cost, and shall be implemented gradually at a rate not to exceed 2 cents per $100 of assessed value. For the purpose of this provision, the term reconstruction is defined as removing all or significant portion of a pavement material and replacing it with new or recycled materials. The dedicated fund established by this subsection C may not be used for the payment of debt service.
that was in the bond language. Oh, that answered that question. All right, play by the rules. Okay. Well, then back to how do we get this 2 cents dedicated as opposed to having to be subject to annual appropriations?
We're showing it as on a spend as you go. And I think the election has tied that money, absolutely. That money is locked. Yep. It's, that 2 cents is locked based on the election.
Once you establish it.
Okay, it's a workshop. We're just listening. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. Again,
questions?
that concludes my presentation.
Okay, that's the whole budget deal, or did you?
Well, we did want to talk about a little bit more. We want to talk about the 5-year prognosis, and we also want to outline.
Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry, I missed Ms. Rubio's name on the list here. Sorry about that.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Stillman, just verify this for me. Is it, or clarify it for me, is it 1 million per street to reconstruct? Is it per mile, 1 million per mile?
That's a good rule of thumb. Now, every street's got different variables.
I'm just trying to get people to understand out there that it's a lot of money.
Yes, ma'am.
And it's based on not just doing the street, but what's underneath the street.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I want that, because people are, like the mayor gets called, I get calls, and I get stopped, and I'm trying to explain to them, and I had a lady just call me on Monday, and it was a little, her comment was, well, we elect people to do what we tell them to do. So I tell her, we're working really hard, but, the ball was dropped years ago, and we're trying to pick up that ball, and we have lots of streets to fix. So I just want to clarify that. Thank you.
And Mayor, we all know in this room that on a staff level, on a council level, there's no shortage of effort in trying to find solutions here.
And we appreciate the effort. So, and I think we're making headway. We're swimming in the muck right now.
and Mayor, if we go through this process and we decide, no, we want to look at another, the spend as you go is a good place to start. If you decide next year, the year after, well, let's look at debt. Let's look at debt to do residential streets. Those options are always out there for you, but our recommendation is to do a spend as you go.
Mr. Garcia?
I'm not in favor of debt, but in times where interest rates are low or construction costs are low, I think that's a good option to consider. The question that I have is related to the Type B funds. Do we have the ability to be able to leverage the revenue from the Type B funds into debt, basically in order to be able to do?
I'm gonna defer that to Noe as well in terms of the comfort level.
Now if you don't have it, but
the comfort level of committing those Type Bs for
I'm just talking about the street.
Yeah.
I'm just talking about the street for
arterials and collectors.
Arterials and collectors. Yeah. You get $3 million a year.
Yeah, I mean, again, if you use only type B exclusively, you can sell sales tax revenue bonds, and, you'll be constrained to a new credit, because I don't think we have that credit necessarily
never done
already
that before.
in the marketplace. So I will do a CO, and I will pledge the sales tax. That gives you more bang for your buck.
Okay.
But there's no prohibition against using the tax. I think Rudy's question is there's no prohibition like Miles just mentioned in the street. I mean, it's pretty clear right there. There's no questions asked that you can't spend it on debt.
Right.
The type B, can you use the type B sales tax revenue to pay on debt incurred after the election authorizing you to collect the tax? You can't go back and pay existing debt, but can you take debt on using the collection under the new election?
The debt must be utilized to be paying for an eligible project.
Well, that'd be streets, either COs or GOs, either one.
Yeah, as long as the debt is paying, as long as it's an eligible project that you're paying for, you can pay for the debt on that eligible project.
But if it's a CO, it's a sales tax debt, and it's not a ad valorem tax debt.
The CO is ad valorem tax debt.
Right, but I mean, but the COs will be paid out of the 1.5.
Exactly. You could say
So let's go back here. We may not end this conversation quite yet. You got $52 million in Proposition 1 for arterials and collectors. You're proposing to be paid for ad valorem taxes.
Correct.
By ad valorem tax debt.
Correct.
The tax B over here is generating how much money? $3 million a year. How much debt service will that serve? Excuse me, not the tax type B that is available for streets. How much is that available out of the? How much money do we have for streets out of the? So much going to economic development. So much is going to affordable housing. What's the numbers that's available for?
$3 million.
$3 million. How much debt service will $3 million carry?
55.
55 million. Buddha bomb, Buddha bang, right there. You can eliminate Proposition 1, take out $52 million to cover Proposition 1 and pay it with your sales tax revenue on type B, and you don't affect your general obligation bond rate at all.
I don't have a designation.
You've just shifted your maximum. You're either wanting to use your sales tax revenue or your ad valorem. You're wanting to commit your ad valorem tax revenue to pay $52 million worth of bonds when you've got an economic development bond package over here that's generating the same amount of revenue. Is that not right?
Mayor, that's a great idea, but there is a fly in your ointment.
Lawyers. That's the name problem. Yeah. Lawyers.
Exactly. Us lawyers.
I tried to finish this presentation, man.
The problem with that, and that's a good, smart concept, and a lot of cities have come up with it. Unfortunately, and what you're talking about is issuing, it sounds like, sales tax debt directly rather than the general fund type debt.
Who cares? The street cares less about who pays for the asphalt.
But
they just want it fixed.
People who buy the bonds care a lot because then you have a different risk profile for repayment of those bonds, and you end up with higher interest rates.
That's what Noe was just presenting, and he just said that you don't have. You got to go back to the rating agencies, and go ahead and repeat that because that's what he just said. They're
You can use, if I may, and I'm not trying to be a lawyer, but I have a lot of
Please don't, your credibility will be suffered. Go ahead.
I don't know who you trust more, a banker or a lawyer. But if you have the sales tax and it's not dedicated for streets, as you have it up there, and you want to rededicate that by leveraging that revenue stream, you can do a CO.
That's right.
We'll get those $3 million from that fund, the sales tax fund, send the money over to the interest and sinking fund account that pays the COs, which in the end will not affect your property tax rate. We've done that. Follow me?
But he's saying you can't do that.
No, I'm just saying the mechanism to do that requires it's just like you're issuing regular debt that would be payable theoretically from the tax rate, and that's what keeps you from paying that higher interest rate.
Mayor, what you have suggested is exactly what's drawn before you. Taking your type B money, paying down on debt, and then freeing up money under your INS to do residential streets. Whether you do that through more bonding or whether you do that on a pay-as-you-go, is the decision. But you just created this, you just described this scenario that's drawn before you.
I'm not that smart.
Because you're looking, the reason you're heading down this discussion of using your Type B money on arterials and collectors, presumably, is so that you can free up money somewhere for residential streets. That's where you're going.
So,
presumably.
So then gets back to my question earlier in the discussion, why do you have to have a bond election on the $52 million of arterial and collector streets, because you've already got the approval under the Type B? It's just a matter of picking the streets and doing it, and that's what the staff's job is based on their rating systems and everything else, and it takes the politics out of it. You base it on the need and not the politics.
And that might be an option if it gets voted down.
You're really creating, you're talking about the bond issue getting voted down?
You took this there, Mayor, yeah.
I mean, if the people go out and say, no, we don't want to pass this bond issue, and then the council turns around and does it,
right,
you have just created a disaster.
I see, yeah, yep.
In my opinion.
You're right. That's your decision here.
So the question is, if you've got the mechanism in place, which we do with the Type B, it's just a matter of identifying the streets and doing it. I mean,
correct.
Talk to me here.
Mayor,
why are we wanting to?
I think me and Noe and I here have kind of articulated your proposal and how it would kind of work.
Yeah.
And your idea is that we could issue a CO for those residential streets. The debt service
for the arterials and collectors using the Type B.
Using your Type B.
Arterials and collectors for streets. And then you would use the Type B funds to pay for the debt that was issued. And it would be general obligation debt, but it would be paid for from the Type B. So you would not get the interest rate penalty that you would have if you had the Type B corporation issue the debt directly. And since it would be done as a CO, there would not necessarily be an election. However, when you do a CO, you have the possibility that you can be forced into an election by a petition during that CO petition period.
People would call to rescind the prospect of having their streets fixed?
If they were against it.
Well, that's the law.
That's a risk, and you need to know about that with any CO.
Don't spend the money and fix my streets. I can just see that petition
right back to the ballot, which takes it right back to the ballot.
Ms. Opal?
So, Mr. Selman, basically what you're suggesting through this scenario with the gentlemen who've been in this conversation is that we can obligate the arterial streets through certificates of obligation, repayment from the portion of the Type B funds that are dedicated to arterial streets. And my concern is that, having seen councils get into difficult situations in the past, they make politically astute decisions that aren't always in line with what was intended at the time the decisions were made. So that $3 million made available on a pay-as-you-go might get paid to something else that we freed up. So what you're suggesting is that then we could then find some other mechanism, CFOs for residential streets, bonds for residential streets. If 55 million, 52 million is the number, if we took that 52 million and said, we got this covered under CFOs payable under this $3 million, arguably there would be 55 million, but it'd be capped, right? It would be capped at 55 million if we went and did bonds for residential streets. And then the question becomes, do we have to say which residential streets we're going to do in the bond, or do we say we have some residential streets that we're going to do that look like this and meet these? I mean, because then that's where the mayor's going to get mad in a few years going, well, you didn't say that. So how, I mean, could we use, if we're going to play out the scenario, replacing arterial street obligation with Type B funding, which would then leave GO obligation available to residential streets, how would we do that?
And
is it hard or is it easy?
What you're saying is, and I think what makes that workable, and you and the mayor may be saying the same thing.
I think we are. I just want to know how this would look.
And that's using COs to issue debt for residential streets, but keep in mind Type B can only be used for arterials, but you're using that general fund the general fund to pay for the debt on that CO, and the money that would otherwise be going to pay for the debt on the arterials is then paid by the Type B.
Let me put it to you this way. I had a conversation with Noe last night. We talked about pockets, right? Cities have pockets of money, and depending on what pocket it comes from, there are certain ways it can be spent. And in the case of the Type B resources, it's a pocket that can only be spent on arterial streets. That's the way that street money is defined. So therefore, all we have to do is align the funding source with the need and how to repay it. And arguably, this whole conversation is around doing just that, with the intent that you free up resources to be able to address what's so important to the community, which is residential streets. But we can't just leave it open-ended. We have to obligate that money otherwise, like we would in selling a bond, to be able to do that. I know the pay-as-you-go sounds good until disaster hits or something happens, and then the pay-as-you-go will go out the window as it has in the past. So we as this council say, if we're going to take an affirmative step to fixing residential streets, then we're going to take an affirmative step on at least the streets we can fix. It reminds me of the starfish story, right? The guy's walking down the beach and he sees them throwing stuff back in the water, and there's starfish all over the beach, and he said, well, you can't save them all. He said, no, but I can save this one. We can't fix all the streets in Corpus Christi because it's too big of a nut, but we can fix these residential streets. So I think that's what we're asking is, if we take this scenario, tweak it and modify it, put arterials where arterial resources are, what can we then do to approach the residential streets that we've been talking about?
I think, Mayor, where the discussion has gone is taking out 3 of the arrows. I think that's what we're talking about now, and we're talking about leaving the debt service where it is, increasing the amount of debt based on the revenues generated from your Type B, and then using all of that to pay for your indebtedness. And putting in 50 mil plus or minus for the residential streets.
And I really think that gives the citizens a level of comfort to know that what they intended,
and it
clearly aligns those obligations with what was intended. And then it comes back to taking this residential street money, some will be locked in, and then the 2 + 2 + 2 continues to provide additional resources as councils implement that and integrate it into the budgeting process.
The 2 + 2 + 2 is constrained to be a spend as you go. What the proposal in the what we've laid out is a mechanism to augment that resources on a pay-as-you-go. But it is already established as a pay-as-you-go. And if you do the 2-2-2, assuming flat, that this is not based on increased valuations, you'd be looking at about $10.2 million a year, without augmented by the, yeah, that's right. So you get about 10.2 a year on a spend as you go. But
I would say, I mean, I think we're coming up, perhaps you guys can go huddle up and come back with another plan.
We've had a good bit of discussions with our financial advisor, and I think some of you all have had discussions with your financial advisor in terms of our debt situation, and we need to have that discussion a little bit more and what that means by adding not just the 52, but adding another 50 into that debt portfolio.
You still haven't answered my question in terms of the bond election, and maybe we're chasing rabbits here, but I'm still not understanding. You've got authority under the Type B, whether you sell COs or GOs, to use that money for that debt, right?
Correct.
So my original question is, if we can cover Proposition 1 with the Type B money, why do we have to reapprove it?
You mean just go out, just take it off the ballot? And it's a valid question. Taking it off the ballot completely and issuing the COs to pay for with your...
Yeah, you wouldn't have to have, unless you wanted to put, say, $5 million or something for residential streets that you could pay. Well, you say you can't use your 222 for debt?
Correct.
You can't use your 222 for that.
That's correct.
That's a spend as you go thing. Well, then use a portion of your existing debt service that you're freeing up by taking out $52 million on that. Drop your $52 million down to, let's just say $10 million.
There you go.
And you got $42 million, then you talk about shifting your debt service over to your general fund maintenance. You've generated a lot of money for your general fund as opposed to your debt. And you're still going to get your $52 million worth of streets based on the type B, because all that Proposition 1 is general fund, is arterial and collectors, and you've already got approval for it. You add your cash as you go, your 6 cents ultimately for residential streets, and you get $10 or $12 million for bond. You reduce your $42 million debt proposal. Yep. You free up another 2 or 3 cents on your tax rate that you can move over to your general fund, and you've covered your debt. You've made your budget.
Mayor, for someone who purported to be a canary, you seem to have your arms around it a little bit.
Just dumb luck.
I would say that, yeah.
You want to go back and think about all that?
Let's give that a look. Let's give that a look. I think I see exactly what you're saying. And,
all right, could go to, I mean, if everybody just got heartburn to go into debt for $52 million, we've got a lot of other projects we need to do. You may want to give that some thought. I'd rather you talk about pay as you go, I'd rather reduce going into debt and putting it over into the general fund and trying to turn our grass green in our parks, making sure the swimming pools work, making sure we're not closing, never have planned on closing senior community centers, but we've got some general fund obligations that could be met if you did that.
Yeah, and I think what you're talking about, though, is only putting that 10 million as a 222, which gets people up to 66 cents, using
No. You go with general obligation debt for residential.
Okay.
This year, you're going to pay for $3.5 million worth of residential streets. Correct. Out of the tax levy.
Correct.
Next year, you're going to have, if the council's willing, to go another 2 cents, so you get to 6 cents. That'll be for that year's. You fix $3 million this year of streets, residential streets. In addition to that, if you sell $10 to $15 million worth of bond, you could throw 2 or 3 more streets in there, but you don't have to do them all in the same year. So, I mean, you've got a 2-prong attack on your residential street program. You got a guaranteed 3 cents a year, or 2 cents a year, $3 million a year. And then once you get them all implemented, you got $6 million every year for residential streets. And you've got a little bit, if you wanted to boost it up, some more people wanted more, you could go another $5 or $10 million on bonds. Maybe you wouldn't have to sell a $20 million bond. You might do a 5 or 10 year bond so that you're not taking out that much debt on it. I mean, I'm not a financial guy, but I'm trying to free up that commitment of what are we paying now on debt service? 20 cents?
22.
So if you eliminate 52 and you go to say 15, then your debt service is what? Oh, you're over here shaking your head.
Maybe a little low.
That's not good. I mean, I don't know. I mean, work the numbers. If you're trying to get more into your general fund, I mean, that's part of the objective of shifting that money. If the general fund is where the real need is, that's what we need to be focusing on. And you do that by reducing your obligation to debt.
There's need everywhere, Mayor. General fund, streets, debt payment. There's not a place that there's.
But we can address 52 million. You still got to pay your existing debt.
Correct.
So you don't have as much wiggle room. But if you can take, this is new debt that you're taking on. So if you don't add this to your existing ad valorem tax debt, the 52, you're saying we can do that without a tax increase. So if you don't have a tax increase and you don't have a new $52 million debt, how much wiggle room do you have to bring it down 1 or 2 or 3 cents to shift over to general fund? I mean, that's where you're trying to go to.
Yeah.
But anyway, maybe we need another workshop after you've had a chance to work these numbers. I don't know.
That may be the case. We'll see, Mayor.
Ms. Opal?
Mayor, I think that if I'm understanding the conversation, that there's an interest in taking that $52 million that is currently being proposed to be on a bond election and to reframing that so that it would fit, to take it off the bond and reframe it so it would fit into a C of O with a dedicated income stream being that portion of the type B. Is that correct? If we do that, then that's one step. So it takes that and puts it over here, has a funding stream, gets sold, arterials get done. Once you do that, and I'm sure that number is going to pop up here. I see Noe over there looking at us. There is then capacity within the general fund, as it would have been for the debt service. And I know that at one point, Mr. Selman, you had suggested that the streets would be maybe in every other year. You would allow maybe that to roll a little bit so you could have more money to put into streets.
It also allowed for a planning process.
But let me just let me play this out. So if you kind of use this pay-as-you-go, it's not debt, but then you sell $10 or $15 million worth of debt. So let's assume now we're at the max of the 2 plus 2 plus 2, however much that, $10 million, is that what we said a year for streets, or $6 million? So let's say you just matched that this year in selling a bond for residential streets. You've now accelerated the ability to get to where we hope to be by selling bonds to do residential streets. We expedite getting asphalt on the road in key neighborhoods because we sell a bond today. It doesn't mean that over time, to the mayor's point, that we're going to get to that same 55 million level, and we may end up selling bonds for something else. But it does enable us to expedite putting asphalt on the roads, fixing streets, and giving citizens what they've been asking for, which is some relief from these roads in such poor condition. So I think that is a really good path forward. And if you have to kind of come back at a workshop or whenever we need to do this, I think we started at one place, we may have ended up at some other, right. But I think where we're going to end up is on the right road, right. If we could say so. So,
residential streets, please.
Residential streets is where we're going.
We're standing in the residential streets saying, this is the path that we're on, and we think this is a good place to help accomplish what's been talked about. And even though, $10 million is only 10 miles, I don't know what an average segment is that we do on residential streets, but sometimes it's a mile, sometimes it's less. So I just see that where we started may not be where we ended up, but I think we're going to end up in a really good place if we can. I think our citizens will appreciate taking the money that was Type B money dedicated to arterials, paying for arterials, and then creating an opportunity as it relates to residential to actually do more than what we thought we could have done to begin with. So thank you.
And in light of that, I think if that's one of the directions you're going, is you take in the, and what's in Proposition 2, I don't remember how that's broken down, Proposition 2, that's streets too.
It was streets also, 22 million. Yep.
I mean, and anyway, look at that and see if you can move some of those up to Proposition 1 and still allow you some wiggle room in that tax rate to get more money into the general fund. I mean, I think you just, basically you're starting over with the new kind of set of parameters. And that's not all bad.
No, that's right.
And we got time.
We do.
So
that's why we're having this discussion now.
That's why the bond program is subject to council approval, I guess, and hadn't been finalized yet.
That's exciting.
So, okay, it's 10:45. Anybody, Mr. Smith?
I'd just like, for the record, that my preference for residential streets is a pay-as-you-go. So as we're going, you're going to hear a ton of conflicting on there. We're talking as 9 members, but personally, I prefer residential, more of a pay-as-you-go program.
Okay. Well, I mean, and that could be the way we end up, and I have no disagreement with that, but I'm just trying to think, if we've got an approved ability to meet the need in Proposition 1 that's been voter approved, and the money's just sitting there just chomping at the bits to get out and be spent on arterial and collector streets, I think you've got the approval to do it, and you don't need approval. So that eliminates that Proposition 1. And if we want to stay with our pay-as-you-go on the residential streets, I really don't have any heartburn. I'm just trying to maximize it. But if it frees up a lot of money for your general fund to get some other things done, and we've really got some needs in that general fund, then I think that gives you some flexibility to do some looking.
Mayor, we're sitting here at the last meeting we're going to have until July 17th. And staff is, I mean, I've been on that side of the DS, and it's very uncomfortable sometimes because if we have this conflicting message, they've got to go to work. We got to have a budget here. What's the deadline to have this budget completed?
At the end of July. We'll get it to you by the end of July. A balanced budget.
So now we need to give them direction today about what.
Well, I think they've got pretty good direction.
Well, the direction, I would make a motion of direction that we calculate that removing that 55 million, putting it under the type B allocation, and coming back with a recommendation on the amount of a bond for residential streets. If it's 10 million, if it's 15 million, if it's 5 million, that we tell the staff what this council wants to do today, because if we come back, we're going to end up in the same shape we did last year, pushing it down the road, and it would include the 2 cents for, that the budget that goes forward would include that 2 cents in the tax rate, because I just feel like we're running out of runway here on terms of really having good quality budget discussions. So that would make that motion of direction that this council would, that I would recommend that we put, I'll say $10 million for the sake of argument, into the bond program for 2018 dedicated to residential streets, pending the staff's recommendation on how we would do that.
Any other discussion? Ms. Wartho?
Thank you. Well, I'm going to take us off of this subject for a moment and take us to page 6 of your presentation, mainly because I want to, pardon? Oh, we didn't vote, did we? Yeah.
Well, is it discussion that you're having, or are we voting on it?
Well, I made a motion of direction for action, and Ms. Guajardo seconded it, so.
Right, so I didn't know if there was discussion. That's why I was just asking, but it's not, it's separate.
Okay.
Okay.
The motion, and these are all subject to discussion, but just to give you some idea to go with scenarios. Anybody have any heartburn with that?
Yeah, I do.
All right, speak up.
I'd like to say, I want prefer pay as you go.
Okay.
And
well,
this
that'd
motion
be
of
part of
direction
it.
does not accommodate that. Yep.
Well, then I'd make a motion to amend it that it include all scenarios, is that you bring back a proposal of what wiggle room you have, as also the pay-as-you-go as one of the, we'll see what impact it has and doesn't have. I mean, I think all of them ought to be on the table.
Pay as go versus debt to cover residential streets.
I'd make that an amendment to the motion.
Well, then I'll just withdraw the motion, and then they'll just have to do that, because my motion was not to do that. My motion was to make a decision today that this council would take action on putting asphalt on the ground. So I'll just withdraw the motion, and then if that's the. This is options. Yeah, but just to bring us back options, you don't need a motion direction to do that. Options would be,
Based on the discussion today, do you all need any formal motion or direction, or do you think you got it?
We'll bring something back, Mayor, for further discussion.
So at this point, the council's not willing to vote on putting $10 million in a bond for residential streets. So that was my motion, was to make that commitment today, and I'll just withdraw that motion.
All right. Okay. I mean, I think he's got the options, and he'll bring back several different ones to us. Any other discussion on that one? Okay, we got time. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Well, back to my page 6, I just wanted to, thank, I know Chief Rocha is here today, and I think that we really would and should be remiss if we didn't say thank you, because we kind of go through this, we go through it a little lightly, and it isn't the $1.5 million shortfall that was bridged today was because you guys took the mayor's advice when he would say, and he would speak for us all, I believe, bring back some solutions. We've got problems with bring your solutions. You did that. And that money, as a team player, is being used for both police and fire. So I just want to bring that to light, because that is money we would have had to have found I don't know where. So thank you for bringing that forth. With that, though, I'd like to say that moving forward, Mr. Selman, with final discussions and presentations, and I hope my council members agree with me, I would like to see the stipulation that TASP revenue, I'm so sorry, in regards to the TASP revenue, which is what the fire department brought forth, which is $1.5 million this year. It's estimated to be about $2 million moving forward. But what I'd like to see in this budget, and again, I hope you guys can agree, or I'd like to hear what you think, is for that revenue stream to be allocated to their department, because they brought it forth and they found it. And just like every other department, there are needs that they are needing. So I think that if everybody is in agreement, or if you'd like to say something about that, I'd like to see that money. Obviously, that would be, we'd be looking at fiscal year, what, 2019, I think, moving forward, allocating that to them. So I don't know how anybody else feels. I'd like to make a motion then of direction to include that in the budget to show that that money, after we use it, will be allocated to their department.
What we're proposing in this budget to balance is to take what you see there under that bullet.
Yes.
And you're suggesting that we not do that
No.
and then go.
No, I'm suggesting
You're talking about for future budgets.
I'm talking about fiscal year, it would be fiscal year.
1920.
1920.
Okay.
That it be allocated, yes, ma'am, yes. That it would be allocated to their department, rightfully. They found it and they've got needs, and I don't think the intent was for it to be placed wherever. I mean, they brought it because we asked them to do that. So I would like to make that motion moving forward, beginning that fiscal year 1920, that it be allocated to their specific fund.
Ms. Opal?
Mr. Selman, is it realistic to assume, I saw in the previous proposal, there were some recommendations for folks like solid waste and libraries to come up with some additional funding resources. I think there's been a discussion about parks and the resources that parks bring together. Within the general fund structure, is it reasonable that departments who bring in revenue, that revenue is dedicated back to their departments?
Well, I heard
the answer is no.
Yeah, the answer is that most of the departments in the general fund work in a deficit mode. They receive money from the general fund, which it comes from ad valorem and sales tax. They put money in the general fund, and this discussion came up in the parks discussion a little bit, doing whatever would be necessary to make our parks self-sufficient. In other words, have a user fee on all parks and parks activities to turn it into a zero-sum game for our users. And what those kind of things do is they price the users out of, the utilization goes down simply because the price goes down.
And I don't want to make light of the contributions, because there is a revenue stream. There are over thousands of EMS calls and the things that happen. But in a general fund world, and how these departments, fire being one, police being one, parks being one, solid waste being one, we don't play finders keepers. Because if the motion is to offset the fire department budget by the amount they bring in, freeing up those funds to be allocated among the broader general fund department, I could certainly support that motion. But to say because this was identified by a particular department, that department then gets to keep those resources, I think that sets up a really bad precedent for all the other departments. And with all due respect, Chief, I mean, it's an important asset, but you're part of a bigger team. This isn't siloed up one way or the other. So I couldn't support that motion as it's presented, because I think that it sets a bad precedent for the general fund.
Any other discussion on the motion? Well, do we have public comment during the?
No.
So what you got, Chief? I'll take it in. I don't think, I think it's Mr. Well, your name's next, Ms. Warlow.
Well, to counter that, I will say, I mean, Mayor, then what you had been saying to the public over and over before every meeting is completely false, according to what Ms. Opal just said, and I don't know that that was your intent. I don't believe it was. I think your intent was bring us the solution, bring us the money for your problems. So I'm not sure how, maybe I'm not wording it the right way, but if Judge Lowe brought to us some revenue stream that she found for her courts to become a better service to the community, then Judge Lowe should get that money every year for the needs in her department. Now, if we want to talk to the chief about what are your needs, and maybe one year you don't necessarily need those funds for this and that. They're one-time spent funds, which, by the way, those funds weren't even on the table 5 months ago because they weren't strong enough for this budget workshop. Now they're a saving grace. So I strongly oppose and respectfully do it, Mrs. Opal, but, and I'm not sure if you were yet appointed on this council at that time, but over and over, we encouraged every department to bring forth your revenue stream. And I say we because the mayor does speak for us when he speaks, for the most part, or in that aspect. I don't believe that it would be a righteous thing. I think it would be the complete opposite. I think that if Mr. Ellington came forth, if Judge Loeb came forth, if, you know, Chief Markle came forth with, hey, we found this, we found that, and we said, thank you, we're going to go ahead and take care of the IT department with that. That would set the worst precedent. So I do stand behind my motion, and it is, we can add some verbiage to it where we can discuss what the needs are at that time, but it needs to go to the fire department.
All right, Mr. Hunter.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't know these answers, and not that I really ever know the answers to the questions I'm asking, but just throwing that out there on this topic. When we bring in grants for departments, does that go into the general fund, or does that go directly to that department and to fulfill those specific needs?
The grants go for the purpose for which they are garnered and intended. So it depends on the type of the grant. But typically those do offset other costs that we incur. It might be a general fund cost. We get a grant to offset that.
Okay. And the first time that this subject was brought up, Ms. Guajardo was right. There was a push that I'm not sure if it was the whole council or which council members there were, but there was a push to support all the individual departments for bringing in money, to reward them in a way so that it could be given back to them. And I know that during times that we're struggling with our budget, that I agree with the mayor, everyone should take a hit and contribute to the greater, I can't say that one.
Don't say that.
The greater Corpus Christi.
Yeah, Mayor, I would like to point out then.
So I would like to ask, just to finish, what suggestions can we have in the future to reward these different departments for bringing in this outside money that we've never had before? And I guess that sums it up.
Mayor, we are looking at using the resources that come in this year specifically for that. We're looking at next year to use part of those resources for the same type of thing, rolling stock and other needs in the department, the fire department specifically. And if you look, and I'm skipping way ahead in the presentation, but if you look in the presentation, you'll see that we've, it's only in this year that this upcoming budget that we've looked at the TASP as a mechanism or opportunity to deal with some of the issues. And in this particular case, they're going to the health funds. But in future years, you can see that we're really not looking to utilize those resources to get. We're not showing those at this point in this 5-year outlook.
Hey, Mr. Smith.
Thank you, and I really appreciate finding that funding on there. You know, we've got the shortfall in health insurance, and unfortunately wasn't at the last meeting. I'm also concerned about the pension fund with it, but. On this motion, a couple of issues with it. One is too narrow. Why are we singling out one department? The motion should be department-wide if we're going to do it. And the other is, you know, we're basically not binding on there. These are decisions to be made by the next council. So we're sitting here, and you know, it's a feel-good motion on there, but it's non-binding. It's really the next council's decision to make. It's not ours. So for those two reasons, I can't really support it. If we're going to make it, it should be for all departments, not one department, A and B. It's for out years, and I don't see that it makes that much difference. So anyway, thanks.
All right. Well, the comment, I think Ms. Warther answered part of the question in that this is a one-time thing, And the budgeting process is that we've got a service to deliver as a city, and these are the funds that we have to allocate to the different departments to deliver that service. Every one of the departments in the general fund are, and when I say every, there may be, there's always an exception to the rule. They are all non-self-sustaining funds. So the general fund is subsidizing the ad valorem tax is subsidizing every department. Some departments have the ability to generate some funds, some don't. And there's two fallacies with the proposal, in my opinion, is that one, and if you don't believe it, you can ask the hospital district and others, this task money is the same, in my opinion, as the DISPRO money that they used to get from the general and the federal government. At some point, it's going to go away. It's not a reoccurring, so anything you allocate using as a repeating expense is not a good use of money, because it may or may not be there the next year. Then it really puts pressure if it doesn't show up. Second is that the money that is being received from these surprise fines goes back to the general fund that has been underwriting or subsidizing that fund. And so I think just from a budget principle, it's not the proper use of the funds. If everybody was self-sustaining, and that would be a whole different ballgame. But I think the general fund is where you go and you pay the departments to deliver the service that we want at the expense of taking money away from other departments to the level that they have to do. So I mean, it's a balancing game, and if we're meeting the service level that we want, and then I think that money just needs to go back in at the discretion of where we might be feeling the pinch somewhere. But so I can't support the motion. Ms. Rubio?
Chief, do you have any one-time needs that could be used rather than, something to be repeated?
Thank you, Mrs. Rubio. I appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak about this issue. That was the whole emphasis of why we sought outside funding, outside of the general fund, and that was to concentrate on one-time capital equipment needs that the fire department has. If you remember, May of last year, I gave a long presentation with regard to our fleet and was looking for a possible bond issue to address the fire department's fleet issue. What we had intended to do with the task money was to concentrate on our fleet, to make sure that our ambulances and our fire trucks and other equipment that we need in order to sustain medical transport, which is what the emphasis of this task money was. It's to replace the money that we're unable to generate based on the revenue that we collect from Medicare, Medicaid, or from our taxpayers. And so, yes, we do have some significant one-time costs that we would like to have used in order to pay for that, yes.
Okay. The reason I ask that is because I know that we're not sure if that's going to be a stable funding source, but if it's a one-time deal, then this could help out the fire department, correct?
Yes, and I also recognize the need to help with this system overall in terms of the shortage that we have with our insurance, and recognize that it is general money that comes back to the city, and if required, and so directed by the city council, you can direct that money wherever you want to. But just know that we also have some needs also in the fire department to take care of, and we still will be able to. I appreciate City Manager Selman he and I had a good discussion last week, and there is some money that we are going to be able to, the $500,000. I just ask that whatever money that is taking away the 1.5 to help out with insurance, that whatever the fire department can collect above that we be allowed to address some one-time needs. That's all we're requesting. And if we can't get the money from the TAPS money, then it'll be a general fund request that we make to the general fund. So it's going to come from one place or another.
Right.
Impact on the general fund or entrepreneurship by the fire department to come up with new monies to pay for needed equipment.
Yes, well, I commend you for looking for that money, because we're always looking for money, okay, always. And so I commend you all for finding that money, and all you want to do is to use it for maybe one-time expenses. And I think that's only fair. And so I hope that, you know, this council decides that, and maybe the wording needs to be changed, you know, on how to say that, Mr. Selman, or if you know how we should be writing this, Mr. Risley. But I think it's a good idea to go ahead and allow them to get those one-time needs.
Well, I think this is more of a policy direction, so it's not really specifically a legal restriction that you're establishing. It's a policy direction. So it's not necessarily, it's drafted by legal because it's not truly binding.
Not even for a one-time need?
Nope.
No, because you determine the expenditures in your budget that you appropriate, and because it's an ordinance, you override any previous policy directions that any previous council may have issued.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comment?
Yes.
Ms. Warlow?
Mrs. Rubio, to your point, that may be, and Mr. Smith, that may be what you said. Well, I don't agree with you respectfully, but it is our decision to make now. And many things that we do up here can be undone. And we have undone many things that other councils have done. So that, for me, is right out the door. We make policy, and policy doesn't stop being made because it's, you know, July or it's the end of June. We continue. If a new council comes up and thinks this is absolutely crazy, we need to, so be it. That's exactly what we're trying to do here with the budget and making sure that money gets put on streets. We don't even know if that's going to be able to happen. I mean, hopefully, but that's what we don't want to happen, is for somebody to come and undo that. So we're sitting up here saying two different things. Number one, the money's not, according to your presentation, we're not even counting, we meaning staff, you, the budgets coming forth in the future, are not counting on this money because it's, quote, one-time money. So it's not good enough to be in there to rely on it, but it's not good enough to give it to them when they brought it forth. So and everybody's got to make their own decision up here because there's a motion and a second. But again, the precedent set, or is going to be or not set, is bring a solution. And I guess I would like to know what your intent was when you said that over and over every meeting at the beginning of our term, because no one is going to bring a solution forth. If we're going to say, bring it forth, we'll put it over here. It's not for you. That is just ludicrous to me. If we want to play as a team, then we need to play as a team, and we need to follow through with what was said over and over. So I hope that everybody sitting up here really sees this for what it is, because it's in black and white. And I don't think it's fair, as Mrs. Rubio just said, to encourage departments to bring forth avenues that don't exist so that you get none of it, so that you don't get it isn't directed to your department. That's just not right.
Hey, Ms. Opal?
Ms. Guajardo, I think that one of the things I want to state emphatically is that to vote in one way or another on this particular motion does not in any way convey the commitment that I think anyone on this council has to public safety. The second thing I would say is your definition of team is different than mine. Because if I'm on a football team and I don't get the ball thrown to me, I don't just sit down and wait until the next person comes by. I know that sometimes I got to take the hit because the next time I may be the one carrying the ball over the goal line. And so when you look at resources that departments bring to the table, I mean, I'm looking at Mr. Ellington, and he stood up here with 300 and some odd fees that he's having to justify for his group. He brought that money in. It doesn't mean that money gets allocated back to his department. This year, I want to be really clear. I mean, the budget for the fire department, is it up or down this year, Mr. Selman? Is it increased or is it not increased?
Offhand, I don't know where it stands.
Okay, it's at least up by $500,000, $500,000 of task money.
I mean the revenues.
And oh, by the way, there is a substantial portion of the management of these health funds. These health funds have been problematic. I'm really glad to hear that there's a discussion that these funds are not to add staffing, as was earlier discussed adamantly when this first discussion came forward, because it is not appropriate to take funds of this nature and try to put them into ongoing expenses, and I'm really glad to see that we've clarified that. I think it has to be on a case-by-case basis, because next year you know, Chief, if something happens to one of your trucks and it goes boom, we got to replace that truck. You can't be down that equipment. That's going to be a decision that the council sitting at this space at that time looks at your needs vis-a-vis all the other general fund needs. And I think that we as a council are committed to making sure that we do the maximum that we can at the time. And I think at the time, what you guys have done benefits the whole general fund. And it would pain me greatly to hear what Ms. Guajardo said if that was the philosophy of this city and the general fund. That I found this money and it is my money, and I'm sorry, the rest of you departments, you need to go find you some money. I just don't think that's the way the city I used to work for runs. And if that's what we've become, if these hard times have become like that, I think it does not bode well for the long-term health and the culture of this community. And I don't think that's what you're saying, Chief. I think you guys, I've talked to, not lately, but I've talked to folks who are in the firefighting field, and I think there's a spirit of generosity and a willingness to many hands make light work. And at this point in time, that's what we have to do. It looks like if our financial advisor's correct, things may get a little better down the road if we see our economy grow. And then it's there and it's available to do that. So I just find that at this point in time to say that making a motion that truly is not going to be binding for the folks sitting in this chair, you know, a year from now, doesn't help you because it sets up an expectation for your team. And it doesn't help the community because at that time, there may be other needs that we may have another hurricane in the meantime. We don't know what would happen. So I just want to make sure that there's on my part, communicating the appreciation and the advocacy for our public safety is not predicated by voting for or against this motion.
Okay, any other discussion? So the motion on the floor is that read the motion, Ms. Huerta, so we make sure we understand what we're doing.
As I understand it, the motion of direction is beginning in FY 1920, the revenue generated by task funding be allocated to the fire department.
I don't even think we've got the authority to do that, but I mean, that's, well, we're not the council doing that budget. But anyway, there's a motion on the floor. Let's call the roll on it.
Yes, sir.
I can't support it.
Okay, so for passage of the motion of direction, Mayor McComb?
No.
Council members Molina?
Just for clarification, Mrs. Guajardo, this is a motion to allocate the entire task money to the fire department?
The task payment.
Yes.
Yes. In 1919 and 1920, in 2019, 2020. I mean, I don't even know how we can be considering this.
Yeah. At this time, I'm going to have to vote no.
Roy?
No.
Rubio?
Yes.
Smith?
No.
Garza?
No.
Guajardo?
Yes.
Hunter?
Yes.
And Lindsay Opal?
No.
The motion fails.
Okay. Ms. Guajardo's name and Mr. Molina's name on the board. You still have comments you need to make, or we got something? Okay. Ms. Guajardo? Okay. So you kind of know where we're going. We gave you some new ideas on addressing projects using debt or how you allocate that. Where do we go from here and time-wise? And since we're not going to meet for a couple of weeks, have we gotten any better indication from the appraisal district on how we're doing? I know the appeals process goes through July or June on their valuations.
Give us the final.
Have we gotten a number yet, or are we still waiting on a final number?
Yeah, the 25th of July is their certified roll date.
So we really can't do anything until the end of July. So we'll have time to have another meeting or two between then.
We'll have a few meetings, Mayor. The
all right.
I'm going to do what I did last week again, Mayor, and try to wrap this thing up. One of the questions that the council asked in previous meeting was, what's the cumulative effect of the rate increases, the utilities, the property tax, at the 2 cent per year, 222, over the next 3 fiscal periods? That would be on a property valued at $180,000. That would be $140. Cumulative by the time you reach there. You can see on this table that there's so much in 2019 and then 2020, 21, and the cumulative of that is 144. In the fee structure, the cumulative would be, because water is likely to see some increases in 2020, and so the cumulative would be 231 out of household per year. Okay.
All right.
Just to look at the two endpoints on the far right side of that column, and that'll get you to those questions being answered. The 5-year outlook, what we wanted to do was we had to make a lot of assumptions here, and what you see there are 4 assumptions that we made. We anticipate continued shortfalls on public safety health. We also anticipate, because we are having a good year on our revenue collection, as was pointed out just a few minutes ago, on our emergency calls. So we would look to continue that trend. We're looking at 2022 and moving another cent from INS over to M&O. And then industrial values, we're seeing a real tick up in those. So that is also reflected in this. And then a general assumptions on revenues are your property tax, sales tax, looking at a 2%. That is well below our actual 10-year average, which we've talked about. Noe Hinojosa spoke earlier that he's using a very conservative number at 1.5. We feel that even this 2% growth is still a good safe number to work with, very conservative. So we're going well below our averages over the last 10 years. And then those are our expenditures that we anticipate. What we were looking at doing was going year by year, but I will skip those slides and go straight to the large table that has every year. And we don't see anything here, based on the assumptions we've made thus far, we don't see anything here that's creating a lot of stress. In the first year, we're looking at a little more than $500,000, almost 700,000 is a shortfall. And again, there's a lot of assumptions built into this, but those aren't big numbers. Then 3.15, or not 3.15, excuse me, but 315,000, just really a third of a mil coming in there, and then 1.2 and 1.2 in the following years. So we're pretty comfortable with this outlook. There's nothing here. We're not looking at 12 million. We're not looking at 20 million type numbers we've got to be dealing with based on our assumptions. That always goes back to that. But we'll be reevaluating this as we get into the next fiscal year, next year, as we get into that year, start looking at revenues and knowing exactly where we stand. And these numbers may move up or down, but this is what we think is a pretty reasonable outlook. And then finally, we were asked to look at some other opportunities. We gave this a look, looked at the coffee shop, and we're looking at different opportunities in solid waste as well, a human resource training division. And then the last one is something that I spoke to last week, and we are going to look to do that in the next fiscal year to make up some of those deficits, really doing an efficiency look. We've got it. We feel comfortable with where we're at right now. We feel comfortable we've got this balanced out this year. Next year, we're going to give a look, a good hard look at our lowest admin level positions and make some decisions there as well. And that's what that last bullet is. And with that, Mayor, that does truly conclude our presentation.
All right. Well, do we have a date yet when we're going to have our next budget?
Originally, we had anticipated this to be probably our last workshop. We felt that we were
Oh, you're
here.
optimistic.
Yes, I was. But I believe we need to come back and discuss the residential street issue and put that front and center and get a path forward on that. So we will scratch our heads on that, try and find the best time. The council meetings may be an opportunity to do that, depending on the load and the volume of agenda items on council meetings and items that might be posted. So we'll consider that as we go. We would definitely be looking at in the next, if we don't move to a council meeting for that kind of workshop, we would be looking at probably a couple of weeks.
Okay. All right. Mr. Hunter? Okay. And in the meantime, if you got questions, contact the city manager. He'll answer whatever you got, or he'll get you to the right
I
department.
can find somebody that can.
Well, thank you for coming. We appreciate your work, and meeting adjourned.